never thought I'd hear my own grandchildren told to eat scraps in my house. But that is exactly what happened one Sunday evening. One ugly sentence was enough to open my eyes to years of things I had chosen not to see. And when I finally acted, it shocked my entire family. What I did next changed everything about my legacy and the way my family will remember me. Before I tell you exactly what happened that night, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you've ever had to stand up to disrespect inside your own family, you'll understand why one throwaway comment at a dinner table could become the turning point of my life. My name is Anita Flint. I'm 70 years old, a widow, and a mother of 2 grown children, my daughter Sarah and my son Michael. Sarah is my steady one, always responsible, dependable, and thoughtful. Michael is charming, but if I'm being honest, he has been spoiled most of his life. When my husband was still alive, he had a soft spot for Michael, and I often went along just to keep peace. I see now that wasn't the best choice. For years I've hosted Sunday dinners. It's the one tradition I've clung to since my husband passed away. I don't live in a mansion or have staff. I have a simple home in Ohio, comfortable for me and warm enough for the family to gather. My goal was to keep everyone connected. Some weeks it worked. Some weeks it was tense. And then there was the week that ended everything we knew. That evening started like many others. Sarah arrived first with her 2 children, Ethan and Nora. Ethan is 11, a quiet boy who loves to read. Nora is 9, full of curiosity and kindness. They never come empty-handed. Sarah always insists on helping me with the food, even when I tell her not to. That night she brought a salad and some homemade rolls. The children immediately offered to set the table. I watched them carefully place napkins and silverware without being asked twice. It reminded me of how Sarah was at their age, always mindful of others. Not long after, Michael pulled into the driveway with his wife Jessica and their 2 children, Landon and Paige. From the moment they walked in, the contrast was clear. Jessica carried no dish, only her designer handbag. Landon, who was 13, walked straight past me and flopped onto the couch, shoes and all. Paige, who's 10, started complaining that she was hungry before even saying hello. Jessica smiled like this was all normal. "Mom, I hope you didn't go to any trouble tonight," Jessica said, brushing her hair back. "We've had the busiest weekend." Sarah gave me a quick glance. She knew that Jessica rarely lifted a finger to help. I just smiled politely, as I always do, and said, "It's no trouble." But in truth, I was tired. My knees ache more these days, and long cooking sessions wear me out. So I suggested something different. "How about we order pizza tonight, keep it simple?" Michael clapped his hands together. "Perfect. The kids love pizza." And that's when the evening began to unravel. Jessica pulled out her phone as though she were placing an order for royalty. "Okay, Landon, what do you want?" Landon didn't even look up from his phone. "Pepperoni and sausage, double cheese. Make sure it's from Marino's, not the cheap place." Jessica typed it in dutifully, then turned to her daughter. "And you, Paige? I want extra cheese, no sauce, and stuffed crust. Oh, and breadsticks, not garlic bread. The breadsticks with the dipping sauce." Jessica nodded again, making sure to write it down like a secretary. Then she added her own order: thin crust with artichokes, mushrooms, and olives. Michael, never shy, said he wanted meat lovers with a side of wings. I sat there quietly waiting for them to include Sarah's kids. Ethan and Nora sat at the table, their hands folded, whispering to each other about what toppings they liked. Ethan loves plain cheese. Nora likes veggie pizza. They were so patient, so polite, just waiting to be asked. But then Jessica looked right past them. She didn't even glance their way. And she said with a little laugh, "Your kids can eat whatever scraps are left in the kitchen. They're not guests here." For a moment, I thought I must have misheard her. My ears aren't what they used to be, but I knew I'd caught it right. She said it clear as day. My daughter's children, my grandchildren, were told to eat scraps in their own grandmother's home. The room went silent. Sarah's face went pale, and she pulled her children closer. Ethan's eyes dropped to the floor. Nora's smile faded. Michael shifted in his seat but said nothing. He didn't defend his sister. He didn't correct his wife. He just looked away. Something inside me cracked right then. I've lived long enough to know that families can be messy. But there are some lines you don't cross. You don't treat children like second-class citizens. Not in my house. Not anywhere. But I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just sat back, my mind spinning because I knew at that moment that everything about my family was about to change. You see, that night wasn't just about pizza. It was about a pattern that had been building for years. The favoritism, the entitlement, the silence I allowed, all of it came to a head in that one cruel sentence. And while I kept calm on the outside, inside, I was already making a decision that would shake my family to its core. I looked at Sarah, then at her children, and I thought, no more scraps, not for them, not for me. That Sunday dinner was the last time I stayed quiet. The moment Jessica told my grandchildren they weren't guests was the moment I realized I had been part of the problem by saying nothing all these years, and that night marked the beginning of my revenge. After that Sunday dinner, I couldn't sleep. I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over. My daughter's children, my own grandchildren, were told to eat scraps. And the worst part wasn't Jessica's words. It was Michael's silence. That silence carried the weight of years. It forced me to think about how we got here, about how two children raised under the same roof could turn out so differently. Sarah was my firstborn. From the time she was little, she carried herself with a sense of responsibility. She was the kind of child you could depend on without even asking. If I needed help with the dishes, Sarah was already standing at the sink. If her younger brother misplaced his shoes, Sarah was the one hunting for them. When she was a teenager, she worked summers at the local library, saving every dollar for college. Michael, on the other hand, was my husband's soft spot. My husband believed boys should be given freedom. So while Sarah followed rules and helped out, Michael was excused from chores with the excuse that he'll grow into it. If Sarah earned straight A's, it was expected. When Michael scraped by with B's, we were told to celebrate him anyway. I can admit it now. We spoiled him not with riches. We were wealthy people, but with lowered standards. He got away with more than he should have because neither of us wanted to fight with him. It was easier to let Sarah carry the extra weight. Life went on like that for years. Sarah studied hard-earned scholarships and built her own path. She became a school counselor, helping other children find their way. She never asked for much, just worked steadily, paid her bills, and raised Ethan and Nora with quiet pride. Michael took a different route. He bounced from job to job, never sticking with one place very long. He liked the image of success more than the work it took to get there. And when he married Jessica, that side of him grew stronger. Jessica is sharp-tongued and stylish. She believes in appearances above all else. The right car, the right shoes, the right vacations. When I first met her, I thought maybe she would push Michael to be more ambitious. And in a way she did, but not in the right direction. She pushed him toward keeping up with people who lived beyond their means. Expensive restaurants, luxury clothes, trips they couldn't afford. Whenever Sarah came around, Jessica made little comments. "Oh, Sarah, is that your car? It's cute." Or, "Your kids don't do travel sports. That's nice, I guess." Always with a smile, always dressed up, always making Sarah feel like less. Michael followed her lead. He never said these things directly, but he laughed along. He let his wife belittle his sister, and he let his children learn the same behavior. I can see now that Sarah has always been the strong one. She reminds me of myself in the years after my husband passed. I became a widow at 60, and it wasn't easy. For the first time in decades, I had to manage everything on my own. The house, the bills, the quiet nights. But I made it work. My husband left me a small pension, and between that and Social Security, I live modestly but securely. I don't take lavish trips, but I don't go without heat in the winter either. Sarah never complains, but I know she and her husband budget carefully. They drive used cars, cook most meals at home, and save for their children's future. She told me once, "Mom, I'd rather live within my means than teach the kids bad habits." That stuck with me. Michael never talks about budgeting. He calls Sarah cheap behind her back. I know because he said it to me once when he thought I'd agree. "Mom, Sarah's so cheap. She should let her kids live a little. What's the point of working hard if you never enjoy yourself?" I didn't answer him at the time, but I thought about Ethan and Nora. They don't have the newest gadgets, but they always say please and thank you. They don't interrupt adults. They sit through dinner without phones in their hands. Sarah may not spend much, but her children shine in ways money can't buy. Meanwhile, Landon and Paige always seem restless. They want the newest sneakers, the newest phones, the next trip. Jessica brags about their private lessons and camps, but I notice how they talk back how they treat people like their staff. It has created a painful contrast. Two sets of grandchildren growing up under the same grandmother's roof, but living in two different worlds. And I can't pretend I haven't noticed how my own choices shaped this. I excused Michael when I shouldn't have. I thought love meant avoiding conflict. But avoiding conflict is what allowed Jessica to speak so freely in my home. It's what allowed Michael to sit silently while his children learned to treat their cousins like they were less. That Sunday night replayed in my head over and over. Sarah's children sitting politely waiting to be asked. Jessica rattling off orders like a queen. And then that sentence, "They can eat scraps. They're not guests here." I realized how often Sarah had been dismissed by her brother and his wife. It wasn't just about pizza. It had been happening for years. When Sarah bought her first little house, Jessica laughed. "It's cozy," she said, glancing at the tiny backyard. "But where you host parties." When Ethan got an award at school, Michael brushed it off. "Good for him, but it's just middle school." When Nora showed her drawings, Jessica compared them to Paige's expensive art lessons. One time, Sarah mentioned saving for Ethan's future college costs, and Michael scoffed. "Why bother? Scholarships will cover it if he's smart enough, and if not, loans build character. That's the difference between my two children." Sarah thinks ahead. Michael assumes someone else will solve the problem. The truth is, Sarah has earned respect through years of hard work and steady choices. Michael has demanded respect without earning it, and I've allowed it far too often. That night, when Jessica said what she said, I finally admitted to myself that my silence had helped create this divide. For years, I thought keeping the peace was the right thing. But keeping peace in the moment often means losing respect in the long run. Now, at 70 years old, I finally understood something simple. Legacies aren't about money alone. They're about the lessons we pass down. And up until that night, the lesson I'd been teaching my family was that bad behavior would be tolerated as long as no one shouted. I didn't want that to be my legacy. Not for Sarah, not for Ethan and Nora. The next morning, I woke up with a clear head. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and admitted to myself that I needed to make a change. Because if I didn't, the next generation would grow up thinking cruelty could be brushed aside and silence was the right response. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Once I admitted to myself that my silence had played a part in all this, the memories started rushing in. I could see a long string of moments that I had brushed aside. Each one small on its own, but together they painted the picture of favoritism that had been growing for years. Jessica was usually at the center of it. She loved to show off. I remember one Sunday she came and talking about how Landon had started private tennis lessons at the new sports club in town. "The coach is expensive, but it's worth it," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Then she turned to Sarah with that smile of hers. "Do your kids play any sports?" Sarah, who doesn't like to make excuses, just said, "They play at the park. We kick the ball around after school." Jessica raised her eyebrows and laughed softly. "That's sweet, but they'll fall behind if you don't get them into something real." I saw Sarah's face fall. She brushed it off quickly, but I noticed I didn't speak up. I told myself it wasn't worth an argument over one comment. There was another time when Nora came in proudly holding a ribbon she had won at the school art fair. She showed it to Jessica, hoping for a little praise. Jessica took one look and said, "That's cute. Paige's art teacher says she has real talent, though we're already looking at programs for gifted kids." Nora's smile disappeared, and she folded the ribbon into her pocket. I should have said something right then. I should have told Jessica that you don't compare children like that, especially not cousins. But I kept quiet, thinking I'd keep the peace. Michael wasn't much better. He had a way of brushing Sarah off whenever she tried to share her struggles. When Sarah was working long hours and her car broke down, she told us she was stressed about how to manage everything. Michael smirked and said, "You're always so dramatic, Sarah. Maybe you're just jealous that Jessica and I don't have those problems." Jealous. That was his word. As if Sarah was jealous of debt and pressure. As if she wanted to live on appearances alone. I sat at that table listening, and I said nothing. I told myself that if I stepped in, Michael would only get defensive. Looking back now, I see how my silence gave them permission. Every time I let a comment slide, I was teaching Sarah that she had to endure it. And I was teaching Michael and Jessica that they could say whatever they wanted without consequence. Meanwhile, Ethan and Nora always tried to rise above it. Those two children amaze me. They don't interrupt. They help without being asked. When Ethan finishes eating, he carries his plate to the sink. When Nora sees I'm slow on my feet, she rushes to hold the door. I've had teachers in town stop me to say how polite and kind they are. Yet in our own family gatherings, those same children get overlooked. One Christmas stands out in my mind. Landon tore into a pile of gifts bigger than anyone else's, shouting about his new tablet and video games. Paige squealed over her designer shoes. Sarah's children opened their gifts carefully, thanking everyone for what they got. Modest toys and books. But I noticed how Michael and Jessica barely looked their way. Jessica was busy snapping pictures of her own kids for social media. Michael was on his phone. Ethan tried to show Michael the book he got, one he had wanted all year. Michael glanced up for half a second and said, "That's nice, buddy," before going back to his screen. And what did I do? I smiled weakly and said nothing. I told myself, it's Christmas. Don't spoil it with a fight. But in truth, the day was already spoiled by the message Ethan and Nora received that their joy didn't matter as much. I could give you a dozen more examples. The family vacations Michael bragged about, while Sarah quietly worked overtime to cover school clothes. Jessica's habit of telling Sarah, "Oh, you wouldn't understand," whenever the conversation turned to money or travel, the way Landon and Paige interrupt without correction, while Ethan and Nora sit quietly waiting their turn. Each time I stayed out of it, I thought I was choosing peace, but really I was choosing silence. And silence, I now see, teaches the wrong lesson. It tells the ones doing harm that they can keep going, and it tells the ones being harmed that their pain doesn't matter enough to be defended. That realization cut me deep because I love all my grandchildren, but love without action isn't enough. Ethan and Nora deserve to know that they are valued, not just in the classroom, not just in their mother's eyes, but in this family. And Michael and Jessica's children need to learn that privilege and entitlement don't win you respect in the long run. It took that shocking sentence. They can eat scraps to finally wake me up. But the truth is, the pattern had been there for years. I just hadn't wanted to face it. I think about Sarah a lot when I reflect on all this. She never complained to me directly about how she was treated. She would brush things off and say, "It's fine, Mom. I don't want to make a scene." But I could see the weight she carried. She tried to shield her children, but children notice more than we think. They noticed when their cousins got praised for the smallest things, while their own efforts were dismissed. They noticed when their Aunt Jessica laughed at their clothes or hobbies. And yes, they noticed my silence too. I can't undo the past, but I can admit the truth. I failed them by not speaking up sooner. I thought I was protecting family harmony, but really I was protecting Michael and Jessica's pride at the expense of Sarah and her children's dignity. That night at the pizza table, the scales finally fell from my eyes. I saw the whole pattern clearly, and once I saw it, I knew I couldn't allow it to continue. From that point on, I promised myself something. No more silence. If I want my family to learn respect, I have to model it. If I want my legacy to mean anything, it has to reflect fairness. I was 70 years old, but I wasn't too old to change course. And I decided that night that I would. Have you ever stayed silent to keep peace, only to regret it later? Drop your story below. And if you believe silence can hurt just as much as words, hit that share button, so more people understand this truth. By the time that Sunday rolled around, I was already tired. My joints were stiff and standing too long in the kitchen. Wears me out more than I like to admit. I thought about skipping the family dinner, but I didn't want to break the tradition, so instead of cooking a big meal like I usually do, I decided we'd keep it simple. When everyone arrived, I told them, "Let's just order pizza tonight, no big fuss." Sarah gave me a smile and said, "That sounds perfect, Mom." She always tries to make things easier for me. She set her rolls and salad on the counter and started helping with plates without being asked. Ethan and Nora hung up their coats neatly and began setting the table. Those children are steady as a clock. Then Michael and Jessica walked in. Landon dropped his shoes in the hallway and went straight for the couch, kicking his feet up. Paige asked right away, "What's for dinner? I'm starving." Jessica swept in behind them, dressed like she was headed to a party, not a casual family night. When I mentioned pizza, Jessica perked up like she'd just been handed an assignment. Great idea. Let's do it right. Michael, get a notepad. Michael pulled out a pen and paper from his pocket like he was taking orders at a fine restaurant. He leaned back in his chair, grinning. Okay, kids, tell me exactly what you want. Landon didn't even look up from his phone. Pepperoni and sausage, double cheese, and make sure it's Marino's, not that cheap place. Michael nodded and wrote it down. Paige, what about you? Jessica asked. Paige twirled her hair. Extra cheese, no sauce, stuffed crust and breadsticks with dipping sauce. Not garlic bread, the breadsticks. Michael wrote it carefully like he was logging something important. Jessica gave her own order next. Thin crust with artichokes, mushrooms, and olives, and get me a salad from there too. Michael added his request without hesitation. Meat lovers large and wings on the side. I sat quietly through all this. I kept waiting for them to turn toward Sarah's children. Ethan and Nora sat patiently, hands folded on the table, whispering softly to each other. I could see Ethan's lips forming the word cheese. Nora was smiling at him, clearly deciding between veggie toppings or plain. They were ready to speak when asked, but the asking never came. Jessica shut her phone case and said, That should do it. My chest tightened. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, Jessica looked straight at Sarah and said in a voice meant to carry across the room, Your kids can eat whatever scraps are left in the kitchen. They're not guests here. The words landed like a slap. The room went silent. Sarah froze, her face drained of color. Ethan's shoulders sagged. Nora's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. They looked at their mother confused, as if trying to understand why their aunt would say such a thing. Michael cleared his throat but kept his head down. He didn't defend his sister. He didn't correct his wife. He just sat there, pen still in his hand, silent. I felt something break inside me. It was as if years of small slights, ignored comments, and brushed off insults had been building up. And this one sentence cracked the dam. My grandchildren, sitting there politely, were told they weren't even guests in their grandmother's home. I looked at Sarah. She reached for her children's hands under the table, squeezing them as though to say, Don't let it get to you, but I could see the hurt written across her face. Ethan lowered his eyes to the tablecloth, fighting back tears. Nora blinked quickly, trying to stay brave. The air was heavy. Jessica flipped her hair back and carried on scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. Michael stayed quiet, glancing at his wife and then back at his list. I sat there trying to steady my voice, but my mind was loud with thoughts. I wanted to shout. I wanted to stand up and tell Jessica that no child in my home would ever be treated as less than another. I wanted to ask Michael why he had become so small, hiding behind silence when his own sister was being humiliated. But I didn't speak then. I swallowed my anger, though it burned. I kept my hands folded in my lap and let the moment pass on the surface while inside I was making a decision. This wasn't just about pizza. It wasn't about who got pepperoni or stuffed crust. It was about dignity. It was about the way Sarah and her children had been treated for years, and how I had let it happen by biting my tongue. That sentence, "They can eat scraps, they're not guests here," was the last straw. It showed me clearly that my silence had been taken as approval, and that if I didn't act, nothing would ever change. I glanced at Sarah again. She was smoothing Nora's hair, whispering something to her, pretending everything was fine. Ethan sat stiff, his eyes glued to the floor. Those children deserved better. They deserved a grandmother who defended them, not one who looked away. So I sat quietly that night, but not because I was defeated. I was planning. I knew in that moment that this family dynamic would never continue the same way again. Dinner carried on in awkward quiet. Michael called in the pizza order without mentioning Ethan or Nora. Sarah kept her head down, feeding her children bites of salad and rolls she had brought, pretending it was enough. Jessica chatted about Landon's new sports club, Paige's lessons, all while ignoring the tension she had created. I nodded here and there, but my mind was somewhere else. My heart was pounding. I knew I had a choice. I could stay silent like always, or I could do something that would leave no room for doubt about where I stood. That night, as I cleared plates and said goodbye to each of them, I made my choice. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. But deep down, I promised myself this: no more silence, no more scraps, no more excuses. That dinner, with all its awkwardness and cruelty, became the turning point, because once I heard those words in my own home, I knew I couldn't let